Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here. Really glad that you're here with us today. My name is Scott from Blue Circle Health, and I've lived with type 1 diabetes for a little over 46 years now. For those who may not be familiar, at Blue Circle Health, we support adults with type 1 diabetes through a free virtual clinical care, education, and support program. And a big part of that is helping people feel a little more supported, a little more confident, and a little less alone in all of this. Today, we're talking about the impact of hormones, midlife changes, and how all of that intersects with blood sugar. And hormones play a significant role in how our bodies respond to insulin, stress, sleep, and so many other factors. And during midlife, those changes can become even more noticeable. So, we're going to spend some time understanding what's behind that through the experiences of our guest today, Melissa Slemp. Melissa focuses on helping women better understand their bodies, especially during times of hormonal change, and how that connects to things like blood sugar, energy, and overall health. She's the host of Type 1 in Midlife podcast, and you can also find her online at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com. And I'll drop a link to her website in the chat in just a moment here. Before we get too far along, I do need to cover a few quick housekeeping points. One, feel free to use the chat throughout. I'll be keeping an eye on it as we go. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat and I'll be sure to get them through to Melissa during the presentation. The second is that this session is being recorded. Participation is completely voluntary, and anything that you share, especially in the chat, may be visible to others. We're not providing medical advice or endorsing any specific products or brands. And additionally, Melissa's not speaking today as a medical professional. For anything specific to your situation, we always recommend talking with your personal healthcare team. All right. Thank you for your patience with that. Melissa, thank you so much for being here with us today. I will turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Scott. This is a privilege to be here. Again, I appreciate being here and talking with these people here at Blue Circle Health and the audience. And yeah, just a little bit about myself. Actually, you know what? I'm going to jump in and just talk about what we're talking about today, and I'm going to share more about myself as we go through this slideshow. And I think, Scott, you and I both agree that it would be great if I can present some information, kind of get the ideas flowing for everybody on this topic about hormones, blood sugar, and really aging with diabetes, and all the things that come along with that. So it really is about knowledge and awareness. And then we can open it up for questions and for that at the end. So I look forward to hearing what takeaways that you may have as you're listening. And this is something, this topic really resonates with me personally. It's something that I've lived through, and I continue to learn about. And if I could stand on a rooftop and talk about it, I would, because it's so important that women living with diabetes understand what is happening. Something I like to say is you're not going crazy, because I think a lot of the symptoms that we're going to talk about today may lead you to believe that everything is just falling apart with you and your health, but it really just is body changing. And today, we're going to understand what's happening. So again, blood sugar.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I just want to reiterate that it can feel harder. Hormones, the different types of hormones we'll talk about today is things that I've learned as I've been aging with diabetes as myself. And I think, again, the more we know, the better, and something to bring up with your doctor. So these are important things to take to your doctor visits. Just to kind of, in some cases, I feel like we educate our doctors, which is all good. You know, we all learn as we go. So just a little bit about me. Scott did an introduction, and I appreciate that. So I have lived with type 1 diabetes for 44 years now. I was diagnosed as 14 years old, And right now, I work as a health coach. I've studied hormone health and nutritional health, and I put all the things that I've learned into action personally. And I think again, that's all about putting our habits into place. I know we've had years. Some of us have had years of practice doing that with diabetes. It's definitely an experiment. It feels like. And, like Scott said, I own my business at Finding Health with Melissa. I'm about to publish a book. It's coming out at the end of the month, and I can share more information if anybody is curious about that. And I also have a podcast. And again, my whole mission is to educate and create awareness and create a conversation around this, and for women to not feel isolated. So, what we'll be covering today is hormones and insulin sensitivity. That is probably the number one thing that we start to notice, um, and why midlife changes everything. So, even during our cycle each month, and this is something I was never even informed about back in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, that the fluctuations in our hormones throughout a cycle do impact blood sugar. Again, it's incredible all these years, and obviously I know it now, but this is something I wished I had known, and something that a conversation, you know, with the doctor would have happened. And another thing to consider is hormone therapy. So this is something I personally use. I've seen many, many benefits from bringing in this, and I'll give you more detail and a chance to ask questions about this at the end too. Again, I'm here to share my experience and the experience from women I know and that I've coached as well. So, if I'm doing this incorrectly, Scott, please correct me. Whether or not they can do anything in the chat box, I should have asked you this on the front end
Yeah,
of the webinar.
absolutely. We can
Okay.
keep people chatting, and that's great. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I encourage you. If you're here today, what's been the most surprising or challenging part of navigating what you're noticing as hormonal changes? And that'd be something you could just pop in the chat. We could get a little conversation going among you that are here today. So the missing piece.
We've
Mhm.
got a couple of comments. Sorry to pop in and interrupt, but just
Please.
want to share what I'm seeing in the chat. So we're seeing some comments about weight gain and insulin resistance, ups and downs that uh, no longer feel monthly, but feel like daily. So yeah, some good input there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, all of that is so expected, but we're not necessarily told to expect it. I think it might be a little different for everybody. But again, I think, and I know this is what you do here within the community, is just to inform so that we're better prepared, for what's happening with our body. Mm. And like I was saying, prepare. It's all about knowing, right? So the doctors, they don't necessarily connect. Most doctors, endocrinologists, don't necessarily connect hormones with type 1 diabetes, specifically insulin dependent diabetes. And women can feel dismissed or even confused about what they're feeling and what they're going through. And you're often left feeling dismissed, like I said, and just guessing on really what your next step is. So, in simple terms, all about simple, let's just kind of break it down in simple terms. And so, estrogen is basically, and this is the most impactful. And again, I did not know this years ago. Again, when I was in my monthly cycles, having my monthly cycles, noticing that the impact that estrogen, when it is more abundant in the body, again, depending on that time of month, it improves our insulin sensitivity. So estrogen itself, we have receptors throughout our body, but we have it in that endocrine system as well. So it makes the insulin basically work better. And that's a simple way to say it. So you may feel like during times of the month when you are more resistant, or insulin can almost feel like water going through your system, and you don't feel like you can get enough to maintain that same level that you've always been able to do. And then the next hormone is progesterone. And this can, on the flip side, can increase resistance. So you may notice in the luteal phase, which is the tail end of your 4-week cycle, usually days 10, or I'm sorry, days 14 to 28. So that's the tail end of the cycle. That's when things start to get a little sticky with our blood sugar. And that's because progesterone is rising. Now, testosterone is important as well. And this is something, it's not only men that have testosterone. We definitely have it and we need it. And it supports our muscle and our insulin sensitivity and the way that our body can process glucose, and it helps our metabolism. And, one of the attendees mentioned, that weight gain, and this does have something to do with that as well. Estrogen and testosterone both play into that tendency to gain weight when they are both going down. So, and this is kind of a fun little graph to look at. And this is really looking at the cycle again through a typical 28-day cycle. So we begin with the follicular phase. So that's day one. Generally, day one is your bleed day. And that can go anywhere from day 1 to 5 to 6 or 7, depending on how long your cycle lasts. And then the tail end of your follicular phase is when estrogen starts to rise. So it's a really good thing. And you may notice this, that during your cycle or right after your cycle, up until ovulation, which as you can see is when estrogen is peaking, that's when you're feeling like a rock star. It's easier to manage your blood sugar. You may even need less insulin depending on other factors that, again, impact our blood sugar, like diet and exercise and sleep and all of that. So the follicular phase really is a magical time, but still awareness needs to be, we still need to be aware of this so that we can accommodate our pump settings or insulin dose settings accordingly. And then on the flip side is the luteal phase, like I mentioned in that previous slide. That is the tail end of our cycle. And that is, again, as you can see, the progesterone is rising. You can see this rise right here in the hill, if you can see my cursor. And we become more insulin resistant. So again, this is on a normal average day, 28-day cycle. And I think, visuals are pretty powerful. When we can see this in action, it does start to make sense. So what changes in perimenopause? Well, generally speaking, everything starts to fall, and that's both the estrogen and the progesterone. So your hormones become erratic. Because that is generally, it is ovulation that is changing. So when ovulation changes, then our need or production from our ovaries, the production of estrogen or progesterone is changing. So that's where the erratic hormones happen. So with erratic hormones comes erratic blood sugar, right? They go hand in hand. And like the slide refers to as well, estrogen drops unpredictably. So the cycles become irregular, or in some cases, they just slowly disappear. A perimenopause can last anywhere from 5 to 10. I've seen it even, depending on the symptoms, last even longer than that. This happened myself. I know mine pretty much took 10 to 12 years that I was in this stage of just consistently falling hormones. So they just deplete over time. And with that, blood sugar has to find a way to do something with itself, and insulin. And it can get really, really frustrating when there is no predictability. And your body and your blood sugar stops being predictable. So what does this mean for blood sugar? Well, it increases our insulin resistance. So again, this is going back to that perimenopause stage. And this can actually, and what I didn't mention as well, perimenopause can start as early as your late 30s. Generally it's 40-ish, right around 40, early 40s. And it can last all the way until your cycles stop. And we'll get into menopause when you're, when that time from perimenopause transitions to menopause. But this is that, say, 10-year period. We're just going to call it a 10-year period. But this is where we do see the increased insulin resistance. So in other words, your body is asking for more insulin depending on the time of the month and the kind of the flow of your those hormones that I mentioned, the estrogen and the progesterone. And one of the very most common symptom too is higher fasting glucose and just overall variability and where you are, what you're doing. You'll find a day where, where you ate the same meal, you did the same activity. It worked great 2 days ago. Now suddenly this is a new day. You're repeating your habit, but your body needs, say, 20, 30% more insulin. And that's where it can get really, really, again, that word unpredictable is really, it goes side by side with what perimenopause is, unpredictable. So it's same habits, different results. So, and these are just some of the symptoms you might notice, believe it or not. And perimenopause and menopause is getting a lot more attention in the news, online. You can definitely seek a lot more information about it now. There's amazing books being written by doctors that really know this space and they know the importance of us women understanding what's happening. And there's 35 known clinically stated symptoms that come along with these hormonal changes. And I've actually heard some people say, well, but there's definitely some outliers, and these are some other doctors and people in the space that kind of have a background with this. But there can be over 100 symptoms because there's a lot of things happening. And then what I've always said, this is the most important thing about this topic is that when hormones are changing and dropping and the symptoms are appearing, and these are just a few, the blood sugar swings, the weight gain, the poor sleep, the brain fog, the mood shifts. Well, we also manage a chronic disease. So I've always said it's menopause is like times 10 for those of us with a chronic disease to manage as well, because we got this other thing that we're trying to keep our, kind of keep a grip on and an understanding of how to manage it. It doesn't take a day off, right? Type 1 diabetes, insulin dependent diabetes doesn't take a day off. It needs care. And when you have something that is fluctuating so much that is impacting how you can care for yourself, I think this is the most important reason why this needs to be something that we're talking about. And that is the hormonal changes for those of us that are in it and experiencing it. And the truth that most women miss is, yeah, again, low estrogen, it makes blood sugar harder to control. It simply does, lower estrogen. And this is something else too that I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. I think if you're going into these stages of life and you kind of have a rhythm with, say, your pump settings or your insulin injections and all of that, your correction factors and your insulin to car ratio, all that data points that we use to help guide us with our dosing decisions. But lower, and there's always well, just take more insulin, and that is fine. That is absolutely, what we should be doing. We got to listen to our body, respect what it needs at a certain time, whether it's a time of the month or age or stage or however that looks for you right now. But I think it's just so important that, when we go to the endo office or we're talking to a doctor or a specialist with this, that they understand that too. That you don't have to explain your way through the appointment, that it's say, hey, have you considered that this is also something that my body's experiencing right now? And this is making it harder. This is, leading me to need more insulin. So I think if that's where the communication and that translation with your physician, your doctor, your care team is so, so important. So knowing starts right here, doesn't it? So why insulin needs change? Again, I'm just going to reiterate. So the less estrogen means there's less I am stumbling, less glucose uptake. Boy, that's a tongue twister. And another thing to consider is less muscle. Again, that's another reason to be lifting weights, staying strong, challenging those muscles because muscles require glucose. It's actually a good storage for excess glucose or storage that we can use, at the end of the day or the end of the week or whatever. But it's a good way to deposit glucose, in essence, when we have that muscle that requires it and needs it for energy. And, also cortisol. More cortisol equals higher sugars, and this is another thing that can happen. And those low hormones can spur the cortisol, especially in the morning, like I talked about in just a few slides prior about those morning glucose spikes. You ever hear the term feet to the floor bolus? I know I was part of that club. I've since kind of figured out so it's not as extreme as it once was. But again, starting your morning with that frustrating high blood sugar or a sugar that's just going to keep going up and not understanding the why, that's something that we need to reverse and really, again, another conversation to have with a doctor. And it's not just about insulin. Yes, this is really, really important to keep in mind. Again, not like it's not like we don't have enough to think about and to consider, but these are the things that are not new as far as, what's important. And like the slide says, we can't outbolus hormones, okay? So the effects of estrogen or progesterone on our body's ability to utilize insulin is going to be evident. But we can look at things like our sleep, managing our stress, lowering our stress, making sure that we are maintaining and building muscle as we are aging, not to let go of that. And of course, a good balanced diet with our nutrition, lots of fiber and protein and all of that. Those are going to help this stage. These are, like the slide said, these are your real levers. These are things you can choose to do. These are things that can help you influence the outcome the best you can, again, as hormones might be shifting. So 7 foundational shifts. So this is kind of an overview, and these are some things just to consider as we're working through these slides today, as I'm talking through these slides. Is number one to track your patterns. And whether you do this with, you may have an app on your phone. You might be like me, where you kind of leave notes in your phone, like your note section, or maybe it's a pad of, like a journal or a pad of paper and pencil. That's great. Any way to track and just keep note of how you're feeling, the time and month, how you're feeling, the insulin requirements that may have shifted during those days and those weeks, and recognizing those patterns. Another thing is to have your hormones tested. This is something that takes this is another really whole conversation because it's really hard to understand your true hormone levels in perimenopause. It's really symptom based when it comes to coming up with a kind of an action plan or things that you're going to do diet wise, hormone wise, exercise wise to really help with those fluctuations. Other things to consider is to increase your protein, to adjust your nutrition. We all know balance is better, right? To not eat naked carbs, making sure we're including the protein and, lots of vegetables, low glycemic fruit. And another thing to consider is just lowering your stress, spending some time alone in nature. Sleep is the most important thing. It really is. I guard my sleep like a watchdog because I've known over the years that it really is the core of my blood sugar, how I feel. We all know that too. If you don't sleep well, you don't tend to function well the next day. And that makes it harder to stay consistent with these foundational things that are going to help us every day. And again, just to reiterate, to strength train and then to consider MHT, which stands for menopause hormone therapy. And I'm going to go over all these, the ones that we just mentioned on that foundational framework. Foods that support hormones, again, clean protein, healthy fats, fiber and vegetables, and smart carbs. So, yeah, again, smart carbs. What are smart carbs? So, they're complex carbs. They come from nature. So, the simple carbs that we tend to, well, we really want to avoid these because they know, the response to the blood sugar and the insulin needs. Talk about unpredictable, right? So, the smarter the carbs, the better. Again, the smart carbs contain the fiber as well. So, when you're building your plate like this, it's just real important. Just understand why it's important. And it doesn't mean that you're restricting. I will say I love to cook and I love to buy beautiful fruits and vegetables. I love going to the farmer's market and just filling my bags with what's in season. Those are things that we get to do, but that's something that you have access to and availability. I encourage you to keep that habit going as well. And muscle is medicine. Again, I mentioned this before. It improves insulin sensitivity, helps to stabilize blood sugar. And again, this is like making a deposit. I just call it kind of the muscle deposit. So keeping us strong. And over time, you will notice a change and improvement with your insulin sensitivity. Another thing is that it does protect our metabolism. So it does help us maintain a healthy weight. And it really does become a non-negotiable as we're aging. So the sooner that you can bring this habit into your fitness routine, the better. And I already talked about sleep and stress, but I'm going to talk about it again. Like I said, it's my favorite thing. So poor sleep, it will trigger higher cortisol. And we all know what cortisol can do to spur blood sugar. And we also know that higher cortisol leads to higher glucose. So that's that vicious cycle if we're not really aware and focusing on this. And we can't outwork poor sleep. That is for sure. And sleep is not something that you can really catch up with either. I mean, we've all had those nights where we just happen to get a bad night's sleep. Maybe the dog had you up or maybe your blood sugar had you up, unfortunately, but different things that can wake us up. But really, if there's a way that you can really protect that sleep routine and, that time to sleep and really working on your circadian rhythm, and it's amazing what can happen to your blood sugar and your hormones, and how it just can kind of really support that. It's a foundation that we have and that we can really lean on. Now let's talk hormone therapy. It's not the same as the old studies, and this is just a very quick overview. Again, I'm not a medical doctor. I've done a lot of studying on this. I personally am on hormone therapy. I have been doing bioidentical hormones for coming up on 7 years now. So right at the age of 52, so I'm about to turn 59, is when I started to shift and I got educated on this. And I had the same sort of kind of, I guess I kind of had that feeling that I could do without hormone therapy. Again, I didn't know much about them. So to begin with, I wasn't educated on why they were important. Definitely didn't have any doctors that were pointing out how they were going to help me improve my blood sugar management and just the overall management. Again, they help with sleep, they help with stress reduction, they help with life. And estrogen itself means life, which is amazing. It fills our body and all the other receptors in the body. And it's just so important. I think it's another good example of knowing and understanding. And the bioidentical hormones, like I said, are different. They're not the synthetic. And the way that they are either compounded or delivered, and there's lots of different delivery methods. But I mean, this is something that you are curious about, you want to know more about. I would definitely seek out a doctor that maybe you have. You can start the conversation with a doctor that you are working with. Bring this topic up. And otherwise, there are some really great hormone specialists that are out there for us to tap into. And just to reiterate too why it helps, it does lower insulin resistance. the one hormone that impacts it the most, I know I mentioned this at the very beginning, and this points back to the follicular phase. So if you remember the follicular phase, that first week to 10 days of our cycle up until ovulation, that's when estrogen is nice and high and peaked and healthy and robust in the system. And guess what? Our body feels good. Our insulin sensitivity is on the uptake. It's just amazing how it just improves this area. It also gives us some help with our sleep and our energy, less inflammation. So low estrogen does trigger more inflammation, just like high blood sugar does. So all these things go in hand. So if you can take a hormone and support it, support your body with the hormone that is not only going to lower inflammation from blood sugar, because it's going to be easier to manage blood sugar, but it's also going to help all the systems in the body become less inflamed, because there's a lot of things that we have to consider living with diabetes, all these other complications that may come with aging. And I think, improved quality of life. I think it's just amazing what I've felt, the women that I've met and that I've walked through that have started on hormone therapy. And, there's some great books and resources out there that you can tap into to learn more. I would definitely encourage that as well. So the 5-step approach, like I mentioned before, is to track and prepare. So keeping, just keeping or being aware of how you're feeling, how your symptoms are happening, and seeing those trends. And, writing this down, I think it's a great thing if we can track it. And, we're lucky too, because most of us have either a CGM, continuous glucose monitor, and or a pump. And there's a lot of tracking and reports that come with these insulin delivery systems and our pump data or glucometer data. And this is proof, numbers don't lie. So if you start to see a trend of needing more insulin around a certain time of the month or as you're aging, this is something to talk with a doctor about and just to see how well this is playing out for you. And like number 2 says, is find the right provider, somebody who can listen, who can give you help around this. And test before treating. Definitely with menopause hormone therapy, that's what we're referring to here. Again, if you speak to a specialist, they will help guide you on when and if testing is something that you need. And to find the right fit, if you decide hormone therapy is a route that you want to take. Again, it's all about that specialist. I think number 2 is finding the right provider is the key, is going to find that doctor, that hormone specialist that knows how to prescribe, that gets to know you, somebody living with insulin-dependent diabetes, on top of the fact that you are aging and your hormones may need some support, and to adjust as you go. Again, a good provider will be there to answer and to guide you. And this is what I hope you walked away with today, is just knowing that your body isn't broken. This is a new phase. It's not a failure. It's not fun, but I think, again, if we can take a step back and just say, okay, I get it now. This is something that nature is transitioning me through. I just happen to be carrying a disease like diabetes along the way for the ride. But again, there is help. There is a lot of ways to find out and get these the answers that you need, and to find somebody that's going to talk to you specifically about who you are, what you need, and to learn more about how your body is responding. Again, awareness before change. Yeah. Big believer. Yes. Yeah. And these are ways to contact me. I know Scott mentioned, again, I have an email, I have a website, I have a book that is coming out on May 27th. And this is exactly what I wrote in the book, because this was something I never had when I was in my 30s, 40s, and 50s. So it's going to help everybody at all stages. And I have some great collaborators and contributors to the book. One is Dr. Vanessa Severo, and she also lives with type 1 diabetes. Just thrilled to have her come in and partner with me and to bring the clinical evidence and the step-by-step guidance for women to read through and to give them what they need. And that was the end of my show. So I think this is the perfect time to open it up for comments and or questions.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I thank you so much. I'm just thrilled to have been able to come in here and talk about my favorite thing today. And thank you.
Well, I love, Melissa, your compassionate approach, right? This is something um, that can be hard for people to talk about. It can be hard for
Mhm.
people to know um, kind of what questions to ask or wrap their heads around what they're experiencing, especially when, as you mentioned, they're being dismissed or they maybe don't have a provider who's engaging with them. So I just thank you for pouring so much of yourself into this topic. I think um, it's much needed in the space. I'm excited to hear that your book is launching soon. And yeah, if you're comfortable with it, I'd love to be able to share all of your slides with people in the recording. So we've got that. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, let's folks, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I have several questions that we can start with. You know, if you're not really happy with the provider that you've got, or you're feeling that they're being dismissive or not taking you seriously, what are maybe some questions that people can ask to either re-engage that relationship with their healthcare provider, or what might they want to look for as they're uh, kind of exploring different options?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think it really is, you have to understand where you are, what you're, it's all really about symptoms. I think that's number one thing that I think is just the most valuable thing is to tracking your symptoms. And like I mentioned in one of my slides, is we're lucky to have data. Right? The average woman going through menopause doesn't necessarily have insulin pump data, CGM data, or just her own personal data. It doesn't necessarily have to be blood sugar related, but how the blood sugar is impacting how she's feeling, the lack of sleep, her A1C is going up, all those things that are so evident. Um, and that to me is like the criteria when you are, like when you go to your doctor. I always say start with who you are, with who you go to now, whoever you have a relationship with, and
Yeah.
just sitting down, maybe sharing, your notes, what you've noticed, and just being very honest. This is what's happening. Is this something, that you can help support me with? Give them that option. I think our doctors want to help us. And yeah, I think that really is. It's really kind of taking control. I don't like the word control, but it is. It's taking back control of where you are, what you need, and having that honest conversation with the doctor and seeing how they can help. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that, and I agree with you. Most of the doctors that we see, they want to help us, and if we can ask the right questions and make it easy for them to help, that goes a long way. We've got a great question in the chat. Would MHT help someone who has completed menopause? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Oh my gosh. There are so many little questions like this because we don't really understand where you are. And then if by chance we're listening to too many other voices, it can get confusing as to how it pertains to you. But no, it's never too late. It's technically never too late to start on hormone therapy. And again, like I mentioned, if you can find a provider, and again, I'm not plugging my book, but I'm mentioning my book. This is a really good resource. I have a lot of free resources too that women here can start with, and it's definitely going to guide them to steps that they can take. There's definitely, because again, these are things that I didn't know. So it's just important to understand that. So no, the answer is no, it's never too late. And, perimenopause is kind of ideal because that's when the symptoms start to pop up. And then that's when the frustration can start to lie in. And I don't know about you all, but living with this disease is tough enough. Do we need another variable that's going to just take the wind out of our sail every day? I mean, no, life is too short. So I think it's real important again to advocate and to ask. ask for more help. Yeah, because the help is there.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit more about some of those free resources, some of the things that have helped you sort of design and drive what you've built on your website and through your coaching program and things like that? I think, again, this um, to me, it from what I'm hearing in your presentation and what I'm seeing in the chat, um, there's just not very much information out there. So, what have you done to try and address that through your services?
Yeah. I think it starts, so obviously my website, you can go on there and I have many blog articles again that you can read through all different topics. Topics from cholesterol, statins. Again, these are words that we're all used to hearing. And it's like, oh, what do I do? What do I talk to my doctor about it? And I've had a lot of experts, doctors, physicians, nutritionists, therapists that have been on my podcast. That is a lot of information as well, as far as, you can go on my website and maybe search by a topic, like a search word, to find an episode that might speak to where you are. And I also have some resources that they can download. There's one I have, it's hormone therapy and type 1 diabetes. So it's pretty straightforward and it does give you kind of the step by step of what to do. It covers a lot of what I covered um, in the presentation today. It just breaks it down where it's, a little bit easier to look at, but really good reference points to consider. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. I want to share another great comment in the chat. So she says, "Thank you for sharing your experience and how you handled your diabetes. I like your breakdown on the three hormones and how it impacts blood sugars. I used bioidentified HRT and it helped me with the hot flashes. Also, my energy level has increased." So that's
Oh,
great. Thank you for sharing.
yes, I love that. I love that. I to this day, all the women I've known and helped, I have not ever heard, "Oh my gosh, why did I do that? Why did I go that route?" Now, in all fairness though, again, you really need to find somebody who knows what they're doing with the type of hormones, the application, monitoring you. Once you're on them, they should be testing you to make sure your symptoms are your number one driver. If you're consistently insulin resistant, you're consistently waking up at 2 a.m. That means that your body's either not absorbing the hormones or you need more. Then on the flip side, hopefully you don't start off too much as far as your dosing or your strength. So there could be adverse symptoms. Again, these are things that you can reverse by just, you know, reducing your dose. There's lots of ways to kind of fix that. Because nothing is permanent when it comes to that. But it's just real important to be in tune, and that's one thing that we're pretty in tune with our bodies here, aren't we? Because we have to be. So yeah, just paying attention, symptoms, symptoms, symptoms. Yeah, yeah.
A question that comes to mind as I think through this is, I think even with type 1 diabetes, we often have those periods of time where things just are hard and, uh, we don't always understand what's going on. And while we have good tools and technology, we just go through pockets of time where diabetes kind of rears its head to show us, okay, I'm still here. How how might someone know that what they're experiencing is just not another one of those hard times with diabetes, but could be the start of perimenopause or some of these hormonal changes?
That's a really good question, Scott. It's hard to know what to point to, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think again, it goes back to maybe tracking your symptoms. And I think what we're used to doing with diabetes too is kind of the checklist, right? It's like, if you're having a day where you're suddenly your blood sugar's high, 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 high. And but we go through the checklist. Okay, is there anything wrong with my pump? Is there stress? Am I under more stress today? Are we hydrated, right? I think it's the same thing. I think it's just recognizing whatever else might be happening in your body that might be triggering these feelings of change, both emotionally and physically. And again, just pointing to that and, honoring that and to find somebody to talk with about. I know your community has ways to do that as well, for women and for people to come together and talk about it. Yeah. Just to validate that. But I think the answer to your question is we don't really know until we can it's kind of a process of elimination, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. And please forgive my ignorance here, but when you mention testing hormones, is it as simple as a blood test? Is it how does that happen?
It is a blood test. Yes, yes. It can be done through plasma. Yes, absolutely. I personally, and if you don't mind me sharing my own personal journey,
Please.
as a diabetic, twice a year, I get my labs done, the A1C, the whole gamut, which is good. And then I also get these, we'll call them female hormones, but it's the testosterone, the progesterone, the estrogen. They don't cost more. I think this is another thing that people think, oh, it's going to cost more. I know with my insurance, it's all covered. Again, it's how the doctors write the prescription for the labs. So obviously, if there's symptoms that are driving the fact that she or, your doctor or yourself would like to know, what your hormone status is, your levels are, and or if you've been prescribed hormone therapy, then testing is definitely something, it warrants testing, just to kind of keep an eye on those levels. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Use
Uh,
simple tests.
Good. Yeah, that's great to know. Um, I want to share a comment and ask a related question. So she says, just to add another fun variable, I have factor V, a clotting disorder. So my doctor is discussing non-estrogen based HRT options. And I know with many things like with many medications or therapies, there's multiple approaches to accomplishing the same goal. Does that apply in hormone therapy? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yes, you are. Yes, absolutely. It can because we're all different. And we all have something slightly unique. And I think, and that again goes back to a good provider that knows you and knows what you need. And I think what she might be referring to is the fact that oral estrogen, that is not really considered bioidentical at this point because it's a synthetic version. And that does have to pass through the liver. And that's where over time for some people, it could lead to clotting issues. So maybe that's the connection. So I personally use a compounded formula. So it's a bioidentical cream that is compounded, so it's transdermal, something I rub on my skin. And again, it's not passing through the liver. So again, those are all those little variables that we kind of have to know as we're going. But it's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
also speaks to, um, as you mentioned several times, working with a healthcare professional that knows their stuff and that you can trust and that you feel is got your interest in mind.
Very important. Yes.
Are there things around like eating? You mentioned the power of food and the power of sleep and the power of strength training. Let's say if our listeners have not really focused on any of those things, any one of them by themselves can feel a bit overwhelming. Do you have any simple ways to start, right? Like it's sometimes you
Mhm.
just got to get started with any one of those. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, you got to start with it's kind of the low hanging fruit version, right? The term that we use. I think it may sound silly, but hydration's so important, and that is usually something that we can put into action pretty soon. And we know how that helps to move glucose through the system. So maybe that's, half your body weight in ounces every day is a good guide. Start there. You know what I like about simple habits is that once we start to get them going, and it could be just as easy as getting our water intake up, is that we see us doing it. It's like, I did it. No problem. Mark it off. Okay. What's next? Right? So
Yeah.
always start with the easy one first and, just to see how that goes. And I really think sleep is one of those things. This is something that I've spent a lot of time talking about on the podcast and just with people I know is I truly guard it like a watchdog. It is something I value. I know the difference of how my day and how just everything feels and rolls when I have a poor night's sleep. So just being able to really, really put your your routine around that and figuring out what that is, and to do that consistently. Yeah. So those are some simple things that you can get started on, that don't generally cost any money. I mean, those are things that we have attainable and, that we can just kind of put into action.
Can I ask a little bit more about your sleep habits? And when I think about, I've heard the term sleep hygiene, right? And for me, it often is just trying to go to bed at a respectable hour and keep my sleep habits pretty consistent. But there's often much more to it than just the time of night that you go to sleep and the time of morning you wake up, right? What are some of the
Yeah.
other things that you do to protect your sleep habits?
Yeah, great big question. We have to think about the one hormone. This is something we didn't talk about at all, but it is so impactful with sleep is melatonin. And we do tend to lose it as we're getting older. And it's definitely something that we can supplement for. I mean, that's an option. But when you understand that cortisol um, can impact that, so it does everything's kind of in a basket when you think about it, how they each impact each other. But if we're protecting our sleep environment, um, you know, lowering the lights at night, the screen exposure. So melatonin wants to kick in and to help us fall asleep and stay asleep. So we've got to do what we can environmentally, so that space around us with the lights, the stimulus, maybe it's the phones, the tablets, whatever we're looking at. So to be conscious of that, what could be actually stimulating and suppressing our melatonin, rather than letting the melatonin roll in. Because you think about our circadian rhythm. I mean, this is how we were built. We're built to get up in the morning, sunshine, cortisol goes up. That's the rising. That's the natural flow of the day. And that's another thing too. Sleep actually starts in the morning. So if we can get out and just get some sunshine in the back of our eyes, and not staring at the sun, but actually feeling the sun on our face in the back of our eyes, that helps, again, get that circadian rhythm in a healthy zone. And later on during the day, it's 8, 9 p.m. at night, we're starting to feel sleepy. So all that's just going to naturally, and that could take some time. You have to you know, kind of redo yourself or your habits, depending on where you are and where you want to be. Another thing I try to encourage as well is, let's say you usually go to bed at midnight, and you're saying, oh, midnight's kind of late. I really should be in bed by 10, or, whatever that goal is. Well, start with, maybe getting to bed by 11:30, again, little micro changes, because the body's not going to really understand what it means to lay it down at 10 if it's not used to being laid down at 10. So you have to just kind of slowly it's just like peeling back an onion with those changes and just seeing how your body's going to respond. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Got it. And it feels like, again, it matches the way that you come across is just very full of grace and being
Mhm.
kind with ourselves. And, you're not setting this hard line like, okay, I'm going to change from midnight to 9:30 p.m., but I'm gonna be kind to my body and start to ease it back. I think that makes so much sense. I also really love your comment about sleep starts in the morning. That's
Mhm.
not something I thought much about.
Mhm.
Yeah. We've got a great question in the chat. What type of providers would be best to have the hormone replacement therapy conversations with? Are these just family practice doctors? Are there what is a specialist called?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are some menopause hormone specialists. There is another site that I could share with you. It's just menopause.org. So this is a free site that you can go on, and you can actually search by where you are, where you're located. You just put your zip code in there, and it's going to direct you to some help near you. So doctors that specialize in this area of health. I always say start with your doctor. I think it's important, especially if you have a relationship with a doctor now, whether it's an endocrinologist or an internist, or just a general practitioner. I've seen so many different um, kind of scenarios of people and different doctors that they've come across that had this conversation. And again, sometimes we're teaching the doctor or we're helping to guide them on what you need. So they seek out the answers to help you. So I always say start with who you're seeing now, ask the questions, see if they can help you, and see if they can refer you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I want to share a related comment in the chat that I'm sure it's frustrating and will frustrate everyone listening and reading, but she shares that it's frustrating sometimes speaking with specialists in quotation marks. She says she was taken aback when mentioning her fatigue and other symptoms to her endocrinologist, and he just responded, "Oh, it comes with age." And again, that really ties into what you were mentioning about that dismissive attitude that we can so often um, bump into. But she goes on to say that, she was finally able to get herself to bring it up, and that's the response that she gets. What are your thoughts? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I am so sorry, and knowing, and I know it's doesn't make it easy for me to say this, but you are not alone, and that's unfortunately kind of the state of our medical in general. I mean, there's some great doctors out there, but in general, I think doctors avoid, this is my opinion, they avoid what they don't know. And they don't necessarily give you answers on an area of health that they can't give you guidance on. So I think their natural tendency is to dismiss it. And I think what I would do in a situation like this is if that, and I know this, like you walk in and you're finally able to share it, and then you just get shut down. Um, maybe she can maybe go back to this doctor and say, "Hey, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I really want answers. I really want to find ways to help myself. If you can't help me with that, do you know somebody, another doctor, maybe a doctor in their practice? They may have a team of doctors that could really consider what I'm sharing. Because we know our bodies. We know when things are different. We just know. Women especially, we're very intuitive. And I know it takes a lot of guts sometimes to say it out loud, admit to it. And it is important to have a practitioner that is willing to stop and listen and direct you if they can't themselves direct you, for help. Yeah.
Yeah, very frustrating situation, and I'm sorry that you're going through that, and so many of you have to deal with that dismissiveness. That's not okay.
No, it's not okay.
Well, Melissa, just taking a look at the time here, we're at that point where I need to kind of do some closing housekeeping and wrap things up. But this has been a fantastic conversation and so badly needed in the space. I think just in general, but especially around type 1 diabetes. So I'm so encouraged and happy to hear that this is where you are finding your path and creating so many great resources for people. So a lot of great comments in the chat about how much this has helped and how beneficial it's been. So
That means everything. Thank you so much, Scott, for the opportunity to come in and to share.
absolutely. Yeah, and
Mhm.
we'll everyone, I'll share the slides as well as Melissa's podcast and her website. There's so much information out there that Melissa has been working hard to put together. Upcoming book coming out later this month, so that's exciting as well. Congratulations on that. And just for everyone who's joined us, I hope that you're walking away with maybe a clearer sense of how hormones and midlife changes can affect blood sugar, and maybe just as importantly, a bit more context for those moments when things feel unpredictable or harder to manage. And there's real reasons behind that. So, again, Melissa, thank you so much for being here and helping make a complex topic feel a little bit more understandable and more practical. This was incredibly helpful. Again, if you'd like to learn more about Melissa's work, we'll make sure to share the links and resources with you after the webinar, along with the recording today. And for everyone here, you can head over to bluecirclehealth.org/events to see what's coming up next. We've got more great conversations like this on the way, as well as new episodes of our podcast every couple of weeks. The podcast is called Around the Circle Living Well with T1D. And you can also find those episodes on our website under the news section. Thanks again for being here and spending this time with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.